Hey, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Elena Kessler. I am the program director here at the Parkinson Association of the Rockies, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's webinar. A couple of things before we get going with Lyndsey here. Thank you for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping items to keep in mind. We will be holding a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, and there are a couple of different ways that you can ask those questions. The first way, if you navigate to your control panel, there should be a little questions tab. Go ahead and click on that, type in your question. That will come to me, and I will pop on after the presentation and ask those questions to Lyndsey directly. The other option is, if you'd like to ask your question verbally, you can use the little raise your hand function, which should be on your control panel. Go ahead and click that. It'll show up as a notification on my end. I will unmute you, and you can unmute yourself, and we'll have you ask your question right then and there. The second bit, this presentation is being recorded, so if you have to leave or if you'd like to share this or watch it back later on, you can. The recording will be available in a follow-up email sent about this time tomorrow. So keep an eye out for that. We will also be uploading it onto our YouTube channel, so you can watch it there. The last couple bits, there are a couple of handouts in your control panel that you can download directly. There's some information on some of our exercise classes, as well as some information on our Young Professionals Council. If you've got anybody in your life who may be interested in that, check that out. Those will also be available in the follow-up email. And the last thing for keep in mind, is there is a survey at the end of the presentation that just helps us to develop our programming a little bit better. So please take a couple of minutes just to fill that out, and that would be awesome. We do have quite a few webinars coming up in the next month, really. And all of these can be found on our website at www.parkinsonrockies.org/educational seminars. So if you are interested in any of these topics, please go there, and you can register from that website. One special one that I'd like to point out is we actually have a Parkinson's 101 for the newly diagnosed series, and Lyndsey will actually be presenting in that series as well. But this is basically just a series that helps newly diagnosed people, or even if you aren't newly diagnosed, kind of walk you through some of those basic concepts for Parkinson's. So the first session on April 14th goes through those basic symptoms, signs, even potential causes. The next one on May 19th is all about medications and treatments and how they interact in the body. And the last one, which is Lyndsey's presentation, is about exercise. So if you're interested in attending any or all of those, go to www.parkinsonrockies.org/PD101, and you can register there. And the last one, I promise, is we have our Colorado Community Conference coming up on Saturday, April 24th. And this conference is all about research. We're having different members of our community here in Colorado come and speak on different topics such as Parkinson's in the gut and different research opportunities, even sleep in Parkinson's. So if you're interested in attending that conference, we will be hosting it virtually. So go to www.parkinsonrockies.org/ccc to check out more of those details there and join us. Okay, I think that's all from me. I will go ahead and change control and let you take it away.
Okay. So hello, everyone. My name is Lyndsey O'Keefe. I'm a physical therapist, and I am here to talk about exercise as a form of medicine for Parkinson's disease. A little bit more about me. I have my doctorate in physical therapy. I've been practicing, this is in my 7th year now. I also am a board certified clinical specialist in neurologic physical therapy. So that's including Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases, as well as brain injury, stroke, vestibular disorders such as dizziness and vertigo. I am a Power Moves certified therapist, and we'll talk a little bit more on Power Moves at the end, but that PWR is Parkinson's Wellness Recovery, and it's a treatment protocol and theory developed by a physical therapist who specializes in Parkinson's disease specifically. And I practice at Pace West Physical Therapy in Boulder. I also am a lab instructor at the University of Colorado's physical therapy program. So our outline for today, we'll talk about Parkinson's disease and how it affects movement. What does the research say about exercise, both in general, but also specifically for Parkinson's? What kinds of exercise and how much should you do? That's why you all are tuning in, right? You want to know what the best kind is to do and how to do it. And we'll get started with a few examples of some exercises to do at home. This is a pretty large presentation, a lot of participants, and so these are very general exercises, but something to get started with if you don't have anything else to go off of. So briefly, background, this might not be new to most of you if you've been diagnosed for a while or read a lot about it, but Parkinson's disease affects a part of the brain called the basal ganglia. It's in the midbrains, and it ultimately is a decrease in dopamine, your production of dopamine, and therefore the uptake and use of dopamine. And dopamine is a neurotransmitter, which is a chemical that the brain cells use and is responsible for motor control. And this is a really big thing that I like to educate my patients on, especially if they haven't heard this before or haven't heard it in such a way, that ultimately that motor control aspect is not necessarily your ability to produce strength for your muscles to contract and be strong. But what it does is it's how to use that strength that those muscles have. So the initiation of a movement, the amplitude or how much strength do you need to complete a movement successfully, and the termination of movements is how and when do you get that movement to stop. And so that ties in to those 4 key symptoms of Parkinson's, which is bradykinesia or slow movement, rigidity or stiffness, tremor, which with Parkinson's occurs at rest, and postural instability, which is just our way of saying balance problems. Of course, there are many more symptoms of Parkinson's disease, both motor symptoms and non-motor symptoms, but we use those as a kind of the clinical picture of Parkinson's. If any of those are present, it leads us to think of that diagnosis. So exercise is medicine. If we put it really simply again, Parkinson's disease is caused by a decrease in dopamine, and exercise helps your ability to use dopamine more efficiently. And so exercise in general can be all of these things: neuroreparative, neuroprotective, helps with your cognitive and emotional health. It can help prevent deconditioning, and oftentimes it's focused on function, especially if you see a physical therapist. And so diving in a little bit more into what all of these things mean. So in terms of neuroreparative, studies have shown that exercise promotes neuronal survival and neuroplasticity. What that means is helps those nerve cells in your brain survive and thrive. If you don't have a disease, it helps you thrive. If it does, it can help them survive a little bit more as that disease progresses. Neuroplasticity is basically the concept that the brain and this nervous system is plastic. It can change, it can recover. And I like to joke with my patients sometimes that, when the response to that usually is, really, it can? And my response is, if it didn't, I wouldn't have a job. So yes, it absolutely, the brain can change. And exercise also optimizes the use of hormones and other chemicals in your brain that are necessary for movement. And so exercise can also be neuroprotective. One study showed that people with Parkinson's who exercised regularly for 2.5 hours a week had a smaller decline in mobility and quality of life for over a two-year span that they conducted this study. And they also have done things a little bit more scientific in terms of controlling that kind of study with mice. And so they injected mice with a chemical that would mimic Parkinson's disease or mimic a decrease in dopamine. And what they found is that the mice that exercised, their brain cells were able to use dopamine more efficiently. So it doesn't necessarily increase the production of dopamine, or so that's what we know so far. But what it does do is it allows you to use the dopamine that is there more efficiently and allow it to be circulating in the brain for longer, so you can, again, use it more. Cognitive and emotional health is so important for, of course, everyone, but especially if you've been diagnosed with something like Parkinson's disease, it can take an emotional toll. And so exercising beyond diving into the anatomy and the physiology behind what it does to the brain cells, it also just it can help improve your mood. Secondary deconditioning is something that happens a lot with just aging in general, but also, of course, a diagnosis like Parkinson's disease. And so that one is when you get weaker. And I know I said that Parkinson's doesn't inherently cause weaker muscles, but it causes difficulty moving. If moving is more difficult, you tend to move less. As you move less, you do get weaker. And so that effect, getting weaker, having less endurance, those kinds of things are secondary symptoms of Parkinson's, especially after a long time since being diagnosed. And exercise, of course, can help get you stronger and get you with more stamina and endurance. And lastly, focused on function. This is my bread and butter, is to find ways to improve function with movement, with practicing that function. The general exercise guidelines, and this is based off of the World Health Organization and recommendations from them, is that aerobic exercise is to be done at 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity or 75 minutes per week of vigorous intensity. And aerobic exercise is anything that gets your blood pumping, anything that increases your heart rate, gets your breathing a little bit harder. So that could be walking, it could be running or biking or hiking, it could be swimming or dancing, going up and down your stairs in your house, that sort of thing. And the minute recommendations are per week, because what they did find as well with studying, again, this is a general population, is that the minutes per week, if it's 150, gets you the same benefit as if you did 30 to 40 minutes a day. And I think that's really good news for a lot of patients because they don't always have time every day or the energy every day to do exercise. But if we can phrase it and think of it as a weekly goal, sometimes seems a bit more manageable. For strength training, so anything's working those muscles, using some resistance training. Resistance might be your own body weight. It might be holding a dumbbell. It might be one of those stretchy TheraBands that your therapist gives you. Those should be done around 2 days per week. 2 to 3 tends to be my recommendation for patients, and that's because we do want to give rest days to muscle groups that we're strengthening. We want to make sure that strength that we're trying to build, you give that day for your body to recover from it and actually build that strength. And balancing is, of course, any exercises that are focused on reducing those wobbles, decrease your risk for falling. That should be done at least 3 days per week. If you're a patient of mine, you probably know that I recommend 5 to 7 days. Balancing is something that really should be practiced a lot because it's a skill. And if it's a new skill for you, just like any new skill that anyone's learned throughout their lifetime, it takes a lot of practice and a lot of repetition. And flexibility, again, I recommend most days. A little per day goes a long way. You're not going to stretch 1 day a week, all the stretches you can possibly think of as hard as you can. And first of all, not expect to not hurt yourself. but also you can't expect that to make long-term goals. We want to keep moving and work on that mobility and flexibility a little bit every day. So going into each of these types of exercises a little bit more specifically, aerobic exercise, again, anything that increases your heart rate and maintains it for at least 10 minutes at a time. And the image that you see there is what we call a rate of perceived exertion scale, or RPE. And so this is something that if you're exercising under the guidance of someone, a trainer, a physical therapist, something like that, they might ask you a lot of, how hard was that? How difficult did that feel? Do you feel like you were, working at a good level? And this is a way of quantifying that a little bit more. So you can see that a 1 is nothing at all. You're watching TV and eating bonbons. A 10 is the hardest thing you think you could possibly do. And so figuring out where you are on that scale as you're exercising is really helpful to know, to monitor if you're exercising enough, or hard enough, or too hard. And so again, what kind of aerobic exercise is best, is most recommended? My recommendation is whatever it is that you like to do, because chances are if you like to do it, you're going to do it a lot. So it truly can be walking if that's something you like, biking, stationary bike, or outside if that's safe and you're comfortable with that. It can be stepping in place at your kitchen counter. You don't have to, or stepping in place while sitting in a chair. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to travel over ground, outside, anything like that to get aerobic exercise. 150 minutes per week of moderate intensity is what's recommended for the general population. And that's on a 5 to 6 scale on this RPE over here. So if we take a look at what that means, a 5 is that you're sweating a little bit, right? But it's not too bad. And a 6 is you can still talk, you're a little bit breathless and you might be sweating. I tend to leave sweating out when I'm talking to patients about it, because everyone's a little different with how much they sweat. They could be standing under an air conditioner, or they could be someone that just sweats a lot really easily. And so that might not be the best monitor, but if you know your body and what is normal for you, that's something that you can take into account. The vigorous exercise, which is the 75 minutes per week, is around a 7 to 8 on the scale. And so a 7 is I can still talk, but I don't really want to. And an 8 would be I can grunt in response, but you can't really get a word out. And so again, when I'm talking to patients about what this really means, I give the example of somebody, you're at work, you're doing your aerobic exercise, you're stepping in place, you're on your stationary bike, and someone comes and asks you, how are you? Your response as a 7 could be, I'm good. And then you got to catch your breath again. You're not going to tell them all about your day and what you had for breakfast and what you plan to have for dinner. That means if you can get all those sentences out in a row, probably means you're not quite working at that 7. An 8 would just be, and then you can't really keep going. So that's, I think, a really nice way of monitoring how hard you're working, is thinking about how long of a sentence you could get out. For aerobic exercise to be beneficial for endurance, we want to see at least 10 minutes at a time. And so again, that 150 minutes per week of moderate, 75 minutes per week of vigorous can be spaced out along however you'd like throughout that week, but each bout of exercise needs to be more than 10 minutes in one sitting. That 10 minutes does not need to be the entire time spent at a 7 or 8 of difficulty on this RPE scale, but it should be an average. You should be spending most of your time in that range. In terms of more specific research for Parkinson's disease, there's a lot of evidence that shows that more is better and that intensity matters. And so some studies that they've done that shows this is, again, with mice. So they induced, they injected mice with something that would induce a Parkinson's-like syndrome. And So what they found, then they put mice on a treadmill and they had them run it for different amounts of revolutions per day. So looking at how much exercise or how intense. And so what they found is the mice that ran only 6,000 revolutions per day were not protected from this agent that they injected them with, that, and they did develop Parkinson's-like syndrome. For the mice that ran 18,000 revolutions per day, so 3 times as much, were protected. So more is better. In a separate experiment, they also found that we also have to keep it, it has to be a habit that you formed. It can't be 1 week of doing this and expect to be fully protected and get all the benefits of this exercise. So they had a different study looked at very similar parameters of exercise and how much, but then also the exercise that lasted for 2 to 3 months allowed for protection from this agent that induced Parkinson's syndrome, as opposed to the ones that were only exercising for 1 month or did not get that protection. And so mice are nice to learn from, but I think humans are more interesting. And so they also did a study with humans diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. There's a scale that's often used in monitoring symptoms of Parkinson's disease called the UPDRS, and there's a motor score part of that. So this is the movement symptoms of Parkinson's. And so they looked at 128 people within 5 years of being diagnosed with Parkinson's. And these people exercised at 3 times a week at either 80 to 85% of your heart rate maximum, or 60 to 65% of heart rate maximum, or the usual care. And that percentage of heart rate max is something that your healthcare provider can help calculate for you. It's based on your age. It can also be affected by medication you may be on. So again, I encourage you to speak with your healthcare provider about what those numbers mean for you. But the point is that higher number means you're working harder. And usual care here tends to be, go for a walk once a week, or, or just even your general normal daily activities. And what they found is within a 6-month reassessment of that UPDRS motor score, the people who exercised at 80 to 85%, the harder, more intense exercise, had a change of only 0.2, and a lower change here is better. We don't want more change in motor symptoms. We want to slow the progression of the symptoms. People who exercised at 60 to 65%, so that kind of moderate intensities, they still exercised, changed an average of 2 points. The usual care, so no real formal exercise, just sort of did what they normally do. They changed 3.2. So the difference again of that high intensity, 80 to 85% of your maximum level of exercise was 0.2. The usual care was 3.2. That's a really big difference. We know that intensity matters as you're exercising. Strength training, again, for general population, recommending 2 days per week, 2 to 3 typically. And this would be the same for people with Parkinson's disease, because again, in its truest form, Parkinson's does not necessarily affect strength, but deconditioning, because you're not moving as much, can absolutely decrease your strength. So we do want to strength train, but there's less specific Parkinson's research about it. And so if you're picking and choosing which strength training exercises are the ones to do, you might be limited on time, you might be just limited in what you feel like you're capable of doing, then my preference and my recommendation is to stick with functional movements. Sit to stand. How many times per day do we have to get up from a seated position, right? We have to get up out of bed in the morning. We have to get up from the table. We have to get off the toilet. We have to get out of the car. All of these times we have to stand up from a seated position, so why not practice it? Why not use that as your strengthening exercise? It strengthens a lot of muscle groups altogether, which is great, more bang for your buck, right? You don't have to do 4 exercises for different muscles. You can do this one and get 4 different muscle groups altogether. And push-ups are nice if you're going to, again, be pushing yourself up from a chair, or pushing your, if You might use a wheelchair and you might need to push your walker. So pushing is an important exercise to practice. And so you can do a push-up modified on the wall, like you can see in that picture there. Marching is a great one as well, practicing lifting up your leg, right? How many people with Parkinson's have difficulty walking because their legs don't pick up as far? So you kind of shuffle your feet a little bit. So if we can practice that, standing up, marching, sitting down and marching, it's a great way of directly affecting something that's often a problem with Parkinson's disease. Typically with strength training, we want to aim for 3 sets of 10 repetitions. And then we think back to how hard should it be? Kind of like the aerobic exercise we talked about, more intense is better. With strength training, that 3 sets of 10 repetitions is something to keep in mind when you think about how difficult you want it to be. That first set of 10 should be very doable. You should be able to get through that without too much difficulty. That third set of 10 should be challenging. That last 10th repetition of your third set should be almost impossible. So still be able to do it, but it was a struggle. And in terms of strength training, if we break down what's really happening, how we get stronger is by causing little tiny breakdowns in the muscle. And then over time, over that next 24-hour period, your body puts down more muscle in place of that. It heals those breakdowns that happen. So that being said, discomfort is expected within that 24 hours. Not pain, right? You shouldn't be not able to get up out of bed the next day. But what I like to say is, that next day when you stand up from your chair, you might remember that you did it yesterday, that you did all those exercises. And so that's totally normal within a 24-hour period. All right, balance. This is definitely something that brings people into my clinic all the time. We want to stay on our feet. We don't want to be on the floor if we didn't plan to be there. So how do we practice balance? At least 3 days per week is the general recommendations. My recommendations tend to be 5 to 7. And that's just because it's a skill and it takes more time, more practice to learn a skill than to just get a muscle stronger. And for balance, much like lots of things, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you don't practice balance, you are very likely going to be worse at balancing. And again, that is for anyone. That's for any general population, especially an aging adult. And so practicing specific dedicated balance exercises is really important. There are tons of options. You don't have to look like this lady in the picture where you're standing on one foot. You can change how wide your feet are. You can put your feet closer together. Tandem stances, just meaning heel to toe, like you're standing on a tightrope, or a lot of people say, oh, looks like the DUI test. That's tandem stance. You could stand on one leg if that's something that's accessible to you. You could change how much your sensory system is helping you. So a lot of times that's your eyes. You could start with your eyes open if that's still challenging enough. You could look around the room, just sort of dart your eyes side to side. Things where what I refer to as hanging on with your eyes, where you're only balancing because you are locked in looking at something that's not moving. And while that's a good strategy, it's not really realistic. And so we do want to make sure you can still balance even when you're not staring at something and holding on with your eyes. And really challenging could be to close your eyes with some balance activities. If you're doing that, you just want to make sure you've set yourself up safely beforehand. You could change the surface you're standing on. A lot of us here are in Colorado, and that means it tends, if the last weekend taught us anything, the ground changes. We get a lot of snow on the ground. We might be, a lot of people in Colorado like to be outside, and there's mud and there's grass and there's trails to be on. So there's different surfaces that you're going to have to walk and balance on. And so practicing on different surfaces is a good idea. So you can start on the ground, a nice firm ground in your house. You can make that sequentially a little bit softer. So you could stand on a pillow, fold up a blanket, take a couch cushion, put it on the floor, stand on that, make something a little bit more floaty under your feet and to challenge yourself. And then of course for hands, you can hold on, you can have your arms out to the side and use all that balance to help you. You could try and cross your arms so that you don't get to use the wings out here. You have to really use your feet. You could also move your arms. Balancing is great if it's as a trick, if you want to take a cool picture and stand on one foot, but really what we want to use balance for is to not fall over when we're doing our daily activities, like reaching overhead, reaching down to pick something up. So practicing balance while moving your arms can be a really good idea. And all my patients know this is my phrase, it should be difficult but doable. If you are standing perfectly still during a balance exercise and it doesn't look like you're challenged, doesn't look like you're wobbling, it's probably too easy. And if it's too easy, you're probably not going to get any better. You're just going to stay the same, which isn't terrible, but most of us want to exercise to get a little bit better at something. And so we want to make it difficult enough. If it's too difficult and not doable, meaning every time you try and get into that balanced position that you want to practice, and after 5 seconds, you're desperately holding on to something, or you're really big wobbles and someone feels like they need to catch you, that's too difficult. Not only is it probably not a great exercise for you because you're not holding it for long enough to learn how to get better, but it's also not safe. So difficult but doable. You should be able to maintain a position for around 30 seconds, but it should be challenging. Flexibility. So daily mobility is really important. Like if we go back to those 4 key symptoms of Parkinson's disease, rigidity is one of them. And that rigidity or stiffness oftentimes happens in the spine, but can happen in the other joints and limbs as well. And so working on that every day can make movement a lot easier for you. So you want stretching to be gentle. There's no prize for touching your toe. Okay, Cirque du Soleil I don't think is hiring anyone right now. So there's no need to go crazy. Gentle hold, feel a slight pull in the muscle, very gentle, and then hold it there. 30 to 60 seconds is long enough to affect change in the actual length of the muscle itself. So it also means once you feel that gentle pull, that doesn't mean you're done. It means you have to stay there for 30 to 60 seconds. I recommend setting a timer because when you're holding a stretch that's a little uncomfortable, 30 seconds is really, really long. So set a timer and then breathe, relax, enjoy the stretch, and then it'll be over before you know it. It's good to stretch the whole body. So your legs, your arms, you can stretch posture, you can stretch your spine. We'll talk a little bit more about some of those principles. But rotation is something that's been proven to be very effective against that spinal rigidity. So again, something very common, so common it's one of the 4 key symptoms in diagnosing Parkinson's disease. So doing some twisting type exercises. So you might be sitting and twisting. You might be lying on your bed before you get up in the morning and letting your legs fall side to side to gently twist your back. So lots of options, but again, the idea is doing it daily and keeping it gentle. So let's talk a little bit about what we can do to get started today. Quick disclaimer, these are general recommendations. They may not be right for you. If you have any concerns, please contact your physical therapist, your doctor, so some sort of medical professional if you're not sure if these are the right things for you to do. So the Power Move certification that I mentioned I'm a part of. This is Parkinson's Wellness Recovery. It's a program. It's also there's a Power Gym that's in Tucson, Arizona. And Becky Farley is a physical therapist, PhD, who has been the pioneer in physical therapy for the treatment of Parkinson's disease. And so she's developed this system of exercises that can be performed in a variety of positions. So this is a nice image of all the positions you can be in. You can lie on your stomach, You can lie on your back, you can be kneeling, you could be sitting, or you can be standing. So it's really modifiable for any stage and ability. If you're not comfortable standing without holding on to something or without someone there to help, then you don't have to. You can still do the same principle of exercises sitting down or even lying down. And so I often teach these as for patients in whatever position is best for them, or depending on what they need help with. If getting out of bed, rolling over in the morning and sitting up from your bed is really difficult, we'll probably practice lying down and practice and doing some of these exercises. If you're someone who likes to get on the floor to exercise, or you might have a pet or a grandchild that you want to get on the floor to play with, then practicing in the kneeling position can be really great. Sitting, of course, is accessible to almost everyone, so that's a great position to exercise in. But these exercise protocols follow 4 main themes, which is posture, weight shifting, rotation, which I mentioned again, great for spinal rigidity, and stepping or transferring. So all things that are incredibly important for daily function, right? We want posture. We want better posture. Everyone wants to stand up a little bit straighter. If I'm in a room full of people, and I can actually get to sit in a room full of people, if I just say the word posture, everybody gets about 1 inch or 2 taller. So everybody wants to work on posture. It's really important. If you don't have good posture, if you're stooped forward, if you're kind of off to one side, it's going to affect your balance. It's going to affect how well you can function. So these exercises address posture. Weight shifting, not something people are often as familiar with by just saying it, but that's the idea of scooting. So being able to get side to side, to scoot back or forward. If you're walking and your foot feels like it just can't get off the ground, that might be because you're unable or having difficulty weight shifting onto the other side so that foot can get off the ground. So we practice a lot of weight shifting ideas. And twisting, like I mentioned, for spinal rigidity. And lastly is stepping or transitioning. Right, that one kind of self-explanatory. Stepping is important for walking and moving around, and we want to make sure that that's functioning as good as possible. So this is one type of exercise that's specific to Parkinson's disease. All right, another exercise I mentioned, sit to stand, one of my all-time favorites. So here's an example of how to do it. You can find a chair that's firm. You don't want to necessarily try this off of a couch or a comfy recliner. So if it's softer, it's going to be a lot harder to get out of. Whether it has arms or not is up to how comfortable you feel. But a challenge here would be to try to stand up without using your hands to push, like this picture shows. But of course, if you need your hands, if that's the right level of challenge for you, then that's where you start. And maybe you work towards being able to do it without hands. The more difficult still would be to do it with your arms crossed so that you don't get those arms out in front of you as a little bit of momentum help. So lots of levels for this exercise. And then of course, going back down, you want to go slowly. You don't want to plop, you don't want to fall into the chair, you want to sit gently into the chair. And that also helps strengthen on the way down. If you plop in the chair, gravity did the work. If you control yourself down into the chair, then you did the work. Heel raises. So your calf muscles are incredibly important muscles when it comes to walking and balancing. They're the primary muscles involved in how fast you can walk. And so strengthening those can be really important. So you can stand holding onto a countertop for support. If you want to add in a balance challenge and you don't think you need to hold on, you could certainly try this without touching the countertop, but maybe still having it close by just in case. And then you're going to press up onto your toes, lifting your heels up as high as you can. Hold for 1 second and then slowly lower your heels back down. Again, for an extra balance challenge, try with only one hand touching, try with no hands touching. You can, again, get more bang for your buck by combining balance and strength into one exercise. So those are just a brief example of some exercises to start with. There's also a going to be a newsletter coming out. And Elena can fact check me on this, but I believe it's April, and I wrote an article for that with a few more exercise ideas as well to get started. But also creating a team. Parkinson's is a degenerative disease, and it's with you for the rest of your life. And so we want to create a team that's going to be helping you throughout that time as things change. That team can include a medical doctor, a physical therapist, an occupational therapist, a speech therapist. And I do recommend that you try and find a number of those professionals that specialize in Parkinson's care or in neurologic care. And so for physical therapy, you can go to the APTA, which is the American Physical Therapy Association. Their website has a Find a PT tool that allows you to search by specialty. So you can search for a physical therapist in your area that specializes in neurologic care. And that's incredibly important because Parkinson's has very specific symptoms and a specific disease process, and having someone who's comfortable with that and knows how to address the specific challenges of the diagnosis is going to help you get the best care possible. And your friends and family are part of your team. Finding someone to help motivate you to get out and do these exercises. Having someone to talk to about your frustrations and what might be stopping you from moving more, and someone just to be in your corner. There are also people who can go to appointments with you and talk about some challenges that they may observe that you may not be as aware of. And of course, community resources. The Parkinson's Association of the Rockies is fantastic. Lots of online classes, hopefully more in-person classes soon, fingers crossed. Support groups. And yeah, so finding that community can be really powerful. So I'm going to open it up to some questions.
Okay, I will pop back on and I'll walk everybody through how to ask questions again. You are right, we are coming out with our newsletter in April, so keep an eye out for that, or it should be available on our website as well in April, so that way you can access it there. But for questions, there are a couple of different ways. There should be a questions tab in your control panel for GoToWebinar. Go ahead and type your questions into there. Those will come directly to me and we can get those answered. Or if you'd like to ask your question directly, we can unmute you and you can ask your question that way. So what you'll have to do for that is you'll raise your hand. I see a couple already, and we will then unmute you and you'll unmute yourself and you can ask your question that way. So we'll go ahead. We did have a couple of pre-submitted questions that I'll hit first. And one question comes from Laura, and she asks, how much exercise is needed and what type of exercise for someone who has never worked out? And I think the essence of that question is really kind of the motivation portion of it. Like how do you get motivated if, say, you're just not used to exercising?
That's a really great question and a really common question to get. I will say, first of all, hopefully you learn to like exercise, but I also would say that you don't have to like exercise, you just have to do it. But it's nice if you enjoy it. And so finding something that you like doing. And so again, aerobic exercise can take on any form. It can be stepping in place while you wait for your water to boil for dinner, and get those 10 minutes in that way. It can, and for strengthening, finding something that's really functional. So it doesn't have to feel like exercise. It just feels like something you have to do. You have to get up out of chairs. So why not, instead of just standing up once from your table, do it 10 times. And so finding little moments in the day can really help. So it doesn't feel like you have to sit down and just get through 30 minutes of exercise and you're miserable the whole time.
Awesome. Okay, so I will go ahead and go to some of our raised hands. I see, Jean, that you have raised your hand, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You can unmute yourself and ask your question to Lyndsey.
Hi. So the study you mentioned where the people with the moderately high intensity aerobic exercise only gained 0.2 points in their score. How many minutes and how many times a week did they do that? And how big was the study?
So the study was, I believe, 130. People. Yeah, 128 people. And they were all within 5 years of diagnosis. So it wasn't a huge study. It's hard to conduct really large studies sometimes because people drop out. Some people don't sign up. So 128 is a pretty good study size for something like this. And I'm sorry, I actually don't have that information on how long they were exercising for. It was mostly geared towards the intensity level. Okay. But I would say focusing on the general principles of those, minutes per week for aerobic, 3 days per week for strengthening, 5 to 7 days for balance, those still apply. So the big factor they changed was just how hard it was when they were doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I believe we have another raised hand. Tina S. I will go ahead and unmute you and you can ask your question.
Hi, this is Tina, and we hope you can help me out. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, I can hear you.
I used to do boxing, dance. I did so much exercise a year ago, and then I passed out. And I actually just regressed. My Parkinson's, I went to the point where I couldn't move. I was an manic exerciser and that too. So I know I overdid it. I had to slow down. I'm having a hard time coming back to exercising and that, and I was going to seek some physical therapy to help me with my endurance and that. I had DBS done on one side of my brain, and unfortunately that's not working as well as it can. They have me at a real high voltage, and it's still not working very well. So I was wondering, what would you advise? You're in Boulder, which would not be too far from where I'm at in the country here in Hudson, to come and see you. But what type of physical therapy would be good with somebody who, I used to do boxing, dance. I still do dance and yoga, and Tai Chi is a big one I do too now. But I like to exercise. I love canoeing. I love hiking, and I want to do that this summer and not be stuck in the house. And I live on a farm, so I have a lot of farm chores too. So I'm used to working a lot out by picking up a 50-pound bag of chicken feed and stuff like that. But I can't do that anymore. So how do I get back to that?
Well, I think you were getting close to when you were saying it's what kind of physical therapist, and I would say finding a physical therapist to help you get back gently, right? You don't want to. You can't. It sounds like you may have overdone it a bit, yes. And not to say that you can't get back to doing still vigorous exercise. We just have to be a bit more careful with it. And so a physical therapist is a great person to work with.
Okay.
If you are more rural and you can't find someone with that specializes in neurologic care, as a general physical therapist would still be someone with enough background training to be able to help guide you safely back into that level of exercise that you want to get to.
Yeah, I don't mind driving to Boulder or any place like that for therapy and stuff like that. So I'd be happy to come and see if you're able to take on new clients. But it's just frustrating because I want to get my endurance back up to where I was, and I want to be able to not have to sit down every couple hours to relax. I want to be moving, and that's the problem I have. But I don't want to keep you guys. So thank you very much, and thank you for doing this today.
Of course.
Thank you, Tina.
Bye.
Okay, so we have got a couple of typed questions. This first question comes from Ellen, and she says that she does Tai Chi, which seems to cover the weight transfer, balance, and some of the strength issues, but would you recommend supplementing with something aerobic like an exercise bike?
Absolutely, yes. And I'm glad you mentioned Tai Chi. It is a fabulous exercise form. There has been quite a number of studies on its effect in improving balance in older adults. And you're definitely right with the weight shifting component. A lot of times with the sustained positions that you're in, it focuses on strength as well. But yeah, I would highly recommend finding some sort of aerobic exercise as well. Again, all those benefits that they saw in terms of a decreased change in motor score with the mice, it was all based on aerobic exercise of that really getting at that neuroprotective mechanism. So yeah, stationary bike's a great tool if you have space in your house for one. Some form of aerobic exercise would be great.
And then this question comes from Helen, and she was asking if you could supply the 1 to 10 smiley face gauge for the difficulty level, and maybe we can include it in the handout that we'll include a handout in the follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow, which all of you will receive. So keep an eye out for that. The handouts will be in there, and we can definitely include the smiley face. It always helps me to kind of, I like those as well.
Yep, yeah, I can definitely send that out. And if you have some exercise equipment or a place in your house that you always exercise, you could keep it right there and check it out as you're going to make sure you're at the right level.
Perfect. This next question comes from Alan, and he asks, how about walking behind a rotavator, a walker with 4 wheels, and the front one swivel, as a way of aerobic exercise?
Oh yeah, so like a rolling walker. Yeah, so absolutely. If that's something, if a walker is, or some sort of device, a cane or walker, is necessary for you to be safe and walk at a comfortable speed, then absolutely. That doesn't take away from the benefit of walking at all.
Awesome. So this question comes from John, and he asks, you said any aerobic is good, but elliptical better than an exercise bike since it works on balance? Or is an elliptical better than an exercise bike since it works on balance, or as well, or better than a rowing machine?
Yeah, so you're right that an elliptical would work on balance. And so for some, if you can safely use an elliptical, then great. But for some people that might not be an option because of the balance side of it. And so luckily it's not better in the aerobic side of things. Again, there's been no evidence that there's one form of aerobic exercise that's better than anything else, so long as it's aerobic, so long as your heart rate is elevating. So whatever you have available to you, whatever you can comfortably and safely do is perfect.
I know that's always the answer that people get, and sometimes hard to swallow. Okay, so we've got a couple more that just came in, and I think we just addressed this. What about an elliptical exercise bike? One of the ones I think that kind of uses both. But works the arms and legs is what I'm kind of picturing.
That's I think what I'm picturing too. And yeah, great. It's all great when it comes to aerobic.
Yeah, everything's good. Okay, and I think we have one last comment, and it comes from, we might have another, or no, never mind. We've got one other comment from Cherry, and they say using the term physical activity rather than exercise can really open the door and is kind of inclusive for all types of movement.
That's a great point. Yeah, it doesn't, if exercise is the word that's really keeping you from doing it, then you can just call it taking your medicine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doing your movement medicine. Whatever works, but absolutely it comes down to activity, to moving in some capacity for a certain amount of time in a certain amount of way to get the most benefit.
Perfect. Okay, so I don't see any other questions coming in, but I will say that again, that there will be a follow-up email sent out around this time tomorrow, so keep an eye out for that. We will be sure to include all of the handouts that we have available, and there will be a recording with all of this information. So feel free to watch it back, share it with people that you know. We'll also be having it available on our YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. Another quick note, there is a survey. Please just take a couple of minutes to go ahead and fill that out. And with that, I will say thank you again, Lyndsey, so much for presenting for us. This is such an important topic, and exercise is everything, as we know, in Parkinson's. So thank you so much for presenting, and I hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Elena.
Have a good one.